and that these people who live close to the ground have a lot to offer us, have a lot of wisdom intact. And so that's what attracted me. And then I was led to travel widely, and I visited Africa. I did research in Africa, 3 trips to Brazil, Ecuador, Thailand, India. And what you see in these cultures is that people move incredibly beautifully. It's like watching gazelles, and it's captivating. There's something very right about it. And they're also pain-free, and they have very particular characteristics. And so, what I teach people is what these people are doing, how to mimic them. And my course, which is 6-lesson course and is now being taught by 35 teachers around the world and a growing number of teachers, and we're very excited because we feel like we're reaching a tipping point and people are beginning to hear about us, and that's ultimately what it's going to take. We need large numbers of people influencing each other, which is what you have in these countries. If you go to a village in Africa, everybody's influencing how the baby is being held, and everybody's modeling each other. They bend in this particular way, they sit in a particular way, and so on. And that's what we need ultimately. But we're getting there one back at a time.
Your background as a biochemist from Harvard and Princeton, and your background in acupuncture from the San Francisco School of Oriental Medicine comes into play through some type of integration, though. You had that background for a reason. What do you think the reason is now doing what you're doing today?
What a fine way of asking that.
Thank you.
My mother used to take care of abandoned babies, orphans, and just abandoned babies, because her background was as a registered nurse. And we used to be recruited. She didn't want us to grow up spoiled brats, so she used to bring these babies into the family, and all of us would help take care of them, nurse them back to health while their papers were getting settled and they could be adopted. So that was my early exposure to alternative medicine, because she was ahead of her time. She was already doing all kinds of alternative stuff, and mostly TLC and massage and, good nutrition and so on for these babies. But that influenced me a great deal. And when I applied to Harvard, I said I wanted to do research in alternative medicine, having no idea, of course, that I would be doing this, which does count. And so I studied biochemistry, and what I got from there is a rigor and an appreciation of scientific method and a respect for that baseline of reasoning. And that I'm very thankful for. And of course, this country has this marvelous liberal arts education. So I was studying, oral literature, and I was studying anthropology, and I just found it. I couldn't decide what my major should be. I found it also fascinating. But I ended up doing biochemistry, and then after that, I wanted to do Chinese. I had already been influenced by one of my best friend's mother, who was an MD, to do Chinese medicine, because she made the statement. She was an MD in New York at the time. I was in Princeton. And she said that if she could do it over again, she would do Chinese medicine the Chinese way. And that, I respected her, and I thought, well, maybe that's what I should do instead of going to med school, which was my original plan. And so that's what I did. And that was a bit of a leap for me, because I was worried that what if it's just placebo, and, you spend all this time studying something and really it doesn't have, so much inherent content. It's mostly placebo. I was concerned about that. But it's been really valuable for me, because it's a totally different model. It's a different way of looking at the body, and I use it very much right now because it's all about creating flow. And it's kind of an electrical approach to creating flow. And what I do now is a hardware approach to creating flow, is one way I look at it.
How interesting.
It really is. I find myself jumping around from model to model, using whatever gives most insight, gives most results, and so on. So, you don't want kinks in your channels if you want to think about it in a Chinese medicine way. And I always tell my students, if you don't want to think Chinese medicine, then think about lymph and blood. And you don't want to have your knees kind of rotated in and your feet pronated, and you're blocking the flow of your natural fluids, your blood and lymph and so on. And so, that's one way of looking at what it is I'm helping people with.
Your book seems to turn everything we've been told and everything that's being transmitted about having a pain-free back on its head. From sleeping to sitting to walking. I want you to talk to us about some of these things. One of the things I also find very frustrating is most of us cannot find good chairs.
Well, I'm very, very happy to be able to make an announcement. First time I'm doing an announcement about
Really?
This. I'm actually creating a chair.
Oh, wow.
Because people ask me all the time, what do I recommend? And I always say, buy something really inexpensive and then just fit the back with a stretch sit element. It could be a towel, it could be a flannel sheet, and I've described how to use that in my book, and if you want me to, I can describe it over the call. Or we have a stretch sit cushion, which has little nubs on it that give traction. But the idea is that you could be stretching your back as you sit. So you're getting a little bit of traction, while you're keyboarding or sitting on your sofa watching TV or sitting in your car. And that makes sitting not only more comfortable, but in fact, therapeutic. And that's huge. And so that's so easily available. And the modern chairs, the ergonomic chairs and so on, they're supporting an S-shaped curve in the spine. And I teach that an S-shaped curve is just a modern distortion. And what you really want is a J-spine, not an S-spine, not a C-spine that everybody knows, that slumping kind of C shape that we make with our bodies. We know that's not good. But what we think we should be doing, which is an S shape, is also problematic. And what we really want to do is a J-spine with the behind and the rest stacked really effortlessly on top of that pelvis that's tipped forward a bit, your tail out behind you, I describe it, because this is what you see in little kids. They have their behinds out behind them. If you look at any Greek statue, they're not tucking their pelvis. They've got their butts out behind them. And then the upper lumbar area, where we think we're supposed to have a natural lumbar curve, their upper lumbar area is pretty straight, not very curved at all. And so that is what I teach. I teach the kind of spinal shape you find in village Africans, you find in the Greek statues, you find in little kids, populations that don't have problems with their back. And I think right there, that's pretty compelling to give it a try. It also makes more sense just, rationally, and I can describe why it makes more sense to have a J-spine rather than an S-spine.
I'd like you to do that, but I want to say one thing about this, which is that there is this assumption, I think energetically, that most of our postures and our structures aren't malleable. I really think that a lot of people carry subconscious sense that they're not malleable, and that once you have a structure and you form a particular way, that you can't change it. It's kind of you're stuck with it. And that assumption, I think, is the first thing that has to go when you start talking about most of us think that we are to have an S spine, and what you're teaching is what's in the villages, which is a J spine. The first thing we have to get over is that we can't do anything about it.
Yeah, people tend to either exaggerate the difficulty or trivialize it. They think, oh, yeah, posture, I've just got to sit up straight, and that's it, right? And then they just kind of force something which they think is good posture, which is actually terrible posture. And then after a while it gets tiring and it doesn't feel too good, and then they go back to doing their relaxed and slumped posture, which they know is bad. And they just go back and forth between those two. Most people do that. Upright and tense or relaxed and slumped. And in fact, both of those are problematic.